Black Lives Matter. That now iconic phrase is more than 3 years old, having gone from Facebook post to Twitter hashtag to national and international political movement, fueled, of course, by the repeated and tragic killing of unarmed black people in the United States by the police. But what has it achieved so far in practical terms? More than 30 unarmed black people have been killed by police this year alone. So are black lives any safer as a result of Black Lives Matter protests? And is the movement impacting the US presidential election? To debate this, I'm joined by Barbara Reynolds, columnist, author, ordained minister, and a former civil rights activist in the 1960s. She's a critic of Black Lives Matter. And from New York, Sean King, journalist, activist, senior justice writer at the New York Daily News, and one of the most prominent faces of Black Lives Matter. Thanks both for joining me in the arena. Barbara Reynolds, just to kick off with you, you've referred to Black Lives Matter as a motley group engaged in confrontational and divisive tactics and ignoring what our history has taught. What do you mean by that?
Okay, let me just jump right in. First of all, I was a protester myself when I was their age in 1965. I was in the civil rights movement protesting the right for blacks to vote. So this is why we're here today, because of Dr. King's nonviolent movement. Now, here's my basic problem with Black Lives Matter. When I saw a protest of Black Lives Matter groups, and they were chanting, "Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon." That's the first thing. It just sent chills down my spine.
Referring to the police, you mean?
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. 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 Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Referring to the police. And then when Baltimore burned, and we had businesses being burned, drugstores being raided, and those drugs turned up in black communities, I saw this as non-productive.
Okay, let me go to Sean King in New York. Is Black Lives Matter guilty of going against the legacy of the civil rights movement, as Barbara is claiming?
No, I don't think so. And first off, I have a great deal of respect for Barbara, for all my elders. And I think that what Barbara has seen is a very tiny, negative microcosm of something that may have happened over the past few years. She's picked one or two negative moments, which are far and away the exception and not the standard of this movement. There are not only chapters of Black Lives Matter in cities all over the United States and around the world, but there are local grassroots organizations in every major city in this country doing peaceful, wonderful, powerful work, advocacy work, be it with fighting police brutality or local education or racial violence or economic disparities. I think there's a lot of good stuff that Barbara may not be aware of that's going on every single day, not with dozens or hundreds, but tens of thousands of people, young people like myself, who are committed to making this country better in peaceful ways. And so you could go back to any point in human history.
Sure, let me ask you this, just for the purpose of our global audience, just clarify two things. Number one, Black Lives Matter is a non-violent movement, and is that the case? Yes?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, that's what you say.
I'm asking him. Well, I'm not saying anything. I'm asking Sean. I'll come back to you in a moment, Barbara. One second. And let me just clarify one thing with Sean. What would you describe as Black Lives Matter's biggest success so far?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I think our biggest success, and this is important to say, is making the entire world aware. We've spent most of the past 2 years making the world fully and completely aware of police brutality and racial violence and the reality that racism is still very, very present in America. It's, as you know, it's so hard to break through in today's news cycle, be it with Donald Trump or this issue of terrorism around the world. So to be able to break through and have the world talking about police brutality. Last year, 1,207 people were killed by police in America. That's the highest number ever recorded in the history of this country. And the world knows this.
Barbara, when Black Lives Matter activists say someone like yourself or veteran civil rights activists like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, who you say haven't been given the respect or attention they deserve by the Black Lives Matter generation, younger generation, they say, well, they're out of touch. Many of them say they're out of touch. maybe they've got a point. Maybe they are out of touch. Maybe the methods that you used in the 60s were right for the 60s. But today, we need a different form of struggle, a different form of resistance.
Well, I think that each generation has to form their own methods and strategies. But what I would like to see is for the youth, the younger people, to reach out to us, because we've had experience, we've been down this road before. But we do have a disconnect, because what Sean is talking about, some of it, I admit I don't know about it.
But Sean, is there a reason people, not just Barbara, but wider media, community leaders, politicians, is there a reason they don't know about some of the stuff you're doing, or there's this disconnect, or there's quote unquote misinformation? Is that because Black Lives Matter is perhaps too decentralized, too anarchic even? Where are the leaders? There are no obvious leaders as there were for the groups in the 1960s. Is that fair?
I think I understand that, but it's not that there's a lack of leaders. Like, we don't think it's leaderless. We think it's leaderful. I mean, there are hundreds of leaders all across the country.
Who speaks for it? Who speaks for the movement?
Well, hundreds of us. And I think that's what's powerful. And not even hundreds, but I would say thousands of us all represent our own concerns in our own cities. And I think we learned from previous movements the pain of having just one person. If just one person represented this movement, and they were caught in scandal or were assassinated, the whole movement would crumble. And so I think we learned the painful lesson from the 60s and 70s that it's actually a powerful thing for us to be decentralized.
Well, that's a good lesson to learn, because actually Dr. King was not the leader. The media kept saying he was a leader, but he led through a coalition. But the point is that I've heard several of the leaders say, this is not your grandmother's movement. There's this, I've heard that. And I hear some of the things would turn me off, because I'm grandmother, but I'm also the mother of the District of Columbia. When you're cursing and using hate language, some of us, we can't connect through that.
So do you agree with Malcolm X that white people should be killed? Is that why you're here?
You damn right I do.
You do?
You think I'm scared to say that to you?
You think white people should be killed,
You
huh?
motherfuckers thought we should be killed when y'all came and stole us from Africa and put us in chains and murdered us for over 400 years, so yeah, you do need to die. I think everybody else on the planet will have peace when you're dead.
Are you responsible for what your parents did?
Listen, I'm talking for me. I answered your question.
All right.
Now I'm done talking because I don't negotiate with fucking terrorists. I think you should go back to those caves that you crawled out of in the Caucasus Mountains, because you can't leave black and brown people alone. We can't have any peace on the planet because of white supremacy and white existence. So yeah, fucking die or go back to the caves. Not scared to say it.
So your interests here are no longer useful, sister. So what do you want to do? We can stop. You can stop. Wait, you can stop right here. Well, you might be misinterpreted, but you got a choice. You can stop.
I'm here as
Go ahead. You ain't gonna say nothing until she leaves, then we can talk. We talking about family. Yep. Homosexuals send in plans to disrupt and take us off of what we're talking about. We're straight black pride. We believe in black men, women, and children coming together and produce a family. There's nothing for us to debate with homosexuals, except where the door is. So she found a door. There's nothing she can help us do while she's here.
Really? How so? Why does white life have value?
Well, I think my
For who? For who? Our argument is that white life is wrong.
Why?
Our argument is that we should never affirm white life. That your argument of just affirming all life in general is not good, especially not good for black people when white life itself is based off of black
why shouldn't we affirm
supremacy.
my life?
You're probably white.
I am white. Why shouldn't we affirm my life?
I don't understand why I have to care about your life anyways. There's no ethical reason as to why white people deserve to live. Affirming black life means that white death has to occur. That's why you should lose this debate and why your life ain't worth affirming.
Can I kill myself, like, under your arguments?
Sure.
Okay. So, should Odie kill himself?
I don't see why not.
Why should we do that? How does that help?
It's ethical.
How is it ethical? We all have some form or another of privilege. Why does that mean we should kill ourselves?
Because you have white privilege.
Why does having white privilege necessarily mean I should kill myself? Why shouldn't I, like, struggle against the structures?
Sure, struggling against the structure means putting yourself on the line, putting your body on the line. Do it. Affirm your suicide. That's cool.
That's very good.
I with my friends. Fuck God. Hey, what y'all think? What that be your chance? What that be your chance? What that be your chest. Run up in your chest. Don't worry about it, bitch. Shut the fuck up. None of that.
News Talk 1010 found this tweet. Please, Allah, give me strength not to cuss, kill these men and white folks out here today. Please, please, please.
Sean, do you think Black Lives Matter is too anti-police perceptionally, and that's going to harm you in the long run?
No, I don't think so, and that's a challenge, though, that we have to face. We have to be able to identify issues of police brutality without people saying we're anti-police. I'm not anti-police. This movement is not anti-police. We're certainly not a violent movement. There has been literally almost no violence emanating from this movement or protesters, no more than you would see in any other movement.
When the Black Lives Matter people and they were chanting pigs in a blanket.
That may have happened one time. There have been literally thousands and thousands of protests. We don't even know if the people who said that, if they were actually even really a part of this movement. That's not a common phrase that you hear in protests.
Okay, if it's not common, why not say it's just wrong?
It is wrong. It is wrong. I would never say it.
Let me just ask you about some of the backlash we've seen from many politicians on both sides of the divide, Democrat and Republican, who've talked about this Black Lives Matter slogan and saying, well, what's wrong with saying all lives matter? And a lot of people get very offended when they hear all lives matter. Explain to our audience why someone like you chooses to say Black Lives Matter rather than all lives matter for people who don't get it.
Yeah. In theory, all lives do matter. I think if you pushed any activists and asked them that, they would tell you. But the very present reality in America is that all people are not treated equally under the law. Young African Americans are exponentially more likely to be killed by police than young white Americans. That's just a reality. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we say it because the reality for most of us in America is that America doesn't treat black folk equally, even if it's just equal pay for equal work. If you look at any statistic, it'll show you black women doing, that are qualified for one job paired up against white men doing the exact same job with the exact same qualifications get significantly less pay. And so, of course, the principle of all lives mattering, that's real. I believe that in principle, but the reality is that America doesn't function based on that principle.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me here in the
organizations in every major city in this country doing peaceful, wonderful, powerful work.
Un anuncio o un voto final dentro de una semana. Regreso contigo, Ramón.
Te están solicitando.
Number one, Black Lives Matter is a non-violent movement. And is that the case? Yes?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, that's
We're certainly not a violent movement. There has been literally almost no violence emanating from this movement or protesters.
Black power! Black power! Black power! Black power! Black power! Is they white? Is they white right? Right here! They white, get their ass! Burn that bitch up! Hey, they beating up every white person! They jumping every white person! Man, no white person come down Sherman! He won! Beat his shit! Bitch! That's what it's called! Hey, look! White boy! They beating up every white person!
There are local grassroots organizations in every major city in this country doing peaceful, wonderful, powerful work.
It's about to go down. It's open season on killing white people and crackers. The Black Lives Matter movement wasn't enough. We tried to appeal to them to let them know that this type of thing would come, it would happen. They thought they were indestructible and invincible because they took advantage of the weakness of black people for too long with all this police brutality. And now they've got black men out there that just can't take it anymore. And they're willing to act out. And they're willing to get you when you least expect it. Come at you when you're not thinking about it. It's not safe no more to be white in America. It's open season. on killing whites and police.
Number one, Black Lives Matter is a non-violent movement. And is that the case? Yes?
Oh, absolutely.
Now that's...
They got violent, smashing windows of stores and cars.
There are local grassroots organizations in every major city in this country doing peaceful, wonderful, powerful work.
So do you agree with Malcolm X that white people should be killed? Is that why you're here?
You damn right I do.
You do?
You think I'm scared to say that to you?
We're certainly not a violent movement. There has been literally almost no violence emanating from this movement or protesters.
There's no ethical reason as to why white people deserve to live. Furthering black life means that white death has to occur. That's why you should lose this debate and why your life ain't worth a first.
Number one, Black Lives Matter is a non-violent movement. And is that the case? Yes?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now that's...
There are local grassroots organizations in every major city in this country doing peaceful, wonderful, powerful work. We're certainly not a violent movement. There has been literally almost no violence emanating from this movement or protesters.
Dr. King dramatized and defined the technique of nonviolence, and yet he also said that the only alternative to fear is violence, and that if that were the alternative, he would have to choose violence. Do you subscribe to that judgment of Gandhi, or would you disavow violence under any conditions?
Well, I think I would have to somewhat interpret Gandhi at this point. I don't think he was setting forth violence as an alternative. I think he was emphasizing, or rather trying to refute an all too prevalent fallacy, and that is that the persons who use the method of nonviolence are actually the weak persons, persons who don't have the weapons of violence, persons who are afraid. And I think that is what Gandhi was attempting to refute. Now, in that instance, I would agree with Gandhi that if the only alternative to violence, to fear, is violence and vice versa, then I would say fight. But it isn't the only alternative. And that is one point that Gandhi was trying to bring out. It seems to me that there are three ways that oppressed people can deal with their oppression.
What are they, Dr. King?
Well, one is to rise up in open violence, in physical violence. And some persons have used that method, persons who have been oppressed. But I think the danger of that method is its futility. I feel that violence creates many more social problems than it solves.
May I interrupt you there, Dr. King? There are today certainly people who are forced to endure a kind of injustice that neither you nor even Gandhi in his time had ever seen. For example, would you regard the martyrs of Hungary's rebellion a year ago as misguided men and having used violence?
I admire freedom fighters wherever they are, but I still believe that nonviolence is the strongest approach. I think that would apply to the Hungarian situation also. I don't think it's limited to a particular locality. I think it should apply in every situation in the world where individuals seek to break loose from the bondage of colonialism or from some totalitarian regime or from the system which we confront in America.
You truly believe, then, that nonviolence is the sole, the universal answer to injustice and oppression?
Very definitely. Very definitely. I feel that nonviolence, organized, I should say, organized nonviolent resistance is the most powerful weapon that oppressed people can use in breaking loose from the bondage of oppression. Now, the other method that one might use is that of resignation or acquiescence. But I think that is just as bad as violence, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good.